Imagine a world in which every child had a role model in sport that they could look up to, someone like them that they could identify with. A world in which sport was used as a force for good, not just big sponsorship deals. We first met today's guest at Common Goals Football Sustainability Summit during the European Championships in Berlin in 2024. She's a former Olympic and World Cup player. She's captained every single team she was a part of, and she's convinced that football or soccer, depending on where you are in the world, has the power to drive huge change. She wasn't just on the stage at the summit, she also donates 1% of her salary to Common Goal to support organisations across the world that are using soccer to help children and communities in need. She's taking time out of her day today to talk with us about diversity, change, and empowerment. So let's see what we can learn from her. Welcome, Isabella, to In Good Company. What a delight to meet you. How are you?
I'm great, Dan. Thank you for having me. That was an amazing introduction.
Well, it's a delight to meet you, as I say, and I'm really excited to get into our conversation. But before we do, maybe let's give our audience to get the chance to know you a little bit better. So we give all our guests the opportunity to tell us about yourself in 60 seconds.
Okay, that's a good one. Well, my name is Isabella Echeverri. I am originally from Colombia. I am 30 years old, and as you mentioned, I am a former Olympic athlete and represented my country for 10 years playing football or soccer, where I played a lot of different tournaments. I lived in 5 different countries across the world, which has given me a different perspective on how I see life. I have 4 master's degrees, in which football has been the one paying for them all. Full of scholarships, but football was the vehicle to get 4 master's degrees. And I am a woman who's very close to my family and who lives by their values, by her values. So I think that's 60 seconds, maybe
Yeah,
more.
yeah, you've done incredibly well, and I think even then, like, uh, slightly downplayed your kind of experience and your career because you've achieved so much in such a short amount of time, and I kind of wanted to delve a little bit more into that as we go through today. But yeah, so we first met you at the as we mentioned in the intro, the sustainability summit, the Common Goals Sustainability Summit. And so, can you tell us a little bit more about that before we get into the rest of the episode?
Yeah, well, when I was a player, I started donating my the 1% of my salary to Common Goal.
Mm,
Common Goal with that 1% of salaries from different players, coaches, clubs, organizations in the football industry, they support different causes in different sides of the world. So for me, that was really important, and I know closely the CEO, and I am also part of Somos Equidad, which is the gender equality movement in Latin America. I helped build it up. And that is one of the projects that Common Goal supports with the 1% of the salaries of all
yeah,
these different people. So they invited me to Berlin for the Football for Sustainability Summit, where I met all the leaders from all the organizations of Common Goal, but I also met different stakeholders in the industry of the football for good.
amazing. And you've been a strong advocate for diversity in sports, and so. And it's already clear that you yourself are a role model or can be a role model for young players, both girls and boys. I would think the and so how has your experience in football shaped your views on the importance of diversity?
Football has been everything for me. So I grew up in Colombia in the
Mm,
90s. Yeah, that was one of the most violent countries in the world, right? In which football was the hope of the country. Football was the one thing that united everybody.
mm,
But I also grew up with no role models in football because back then you never saw women's football in TV. Social media was not around. Um, and I played football since I was very, very young, since I
mm,
was like 5 or 6 years old. And I never questioned why I wasn't seeing women on TV, or why there were not more girls around me that were playing. I don't know why I never questioned myself on that. But I did grew up with very strong, powerful women in my family,
Mm,
which made me a very strong, powerful young girl, right?
mm,
Which I was not afraid, one, to play football with a room full of boys, or with a field full of boys. Um, but it also made me conscious on the strength I had as a woman, and I think growing up in this context, having these powerful role models in my life was key for my development, and was also key to start asking questions later on in life.
mm,
And my first time playing with girls or young women was when I was 14 years old. So I played with boys for 10 years. Then my first encounter with women's football was when I was 14,
mm.
and then I realized, wow, it is really hard to get a field to practice in. Oh, wow, it is really hard to get resources to travel to a tournament. This didn't happen when I played with boys.
Yeah,
So that was the moment when I started to ask questions. And that was the moment where all these different questions about diversity came into my mind. Um, and it was also a moment when I started to realize that I wanted to do things to change it, and
yeah.
to change the reality not only in Colombia but also of women's football.
Amazing. It your passion for this just emanates from you, clearly because you continue to use the platforms that you do to kind of send that positive message. In your opinion, then, what I presume there are maybe still barriers to overcome in the sports industry. So, what maybe are those barriers, and how can we overcome them?
There's a lot of barriers in the sports industry. We can keep talking about it for hours here, but
Yeah.
the ones that have a special place in my heart then would be, one, the lack of representation in leadership positions. There's a lack of diversity.
Mm,
There's a lack of women in sitting at the big tables.
mm,
And I always say this, and I'm not sure if this is the proper space to say it, but the sports world is full, and with all due respect to everybody, is full of old, white, heterosexual men
mm,
who are leading the sports for decades, and they don't understand the power that diversity has on performance, right? So um yeah, we need more women leaders,
yeah.
or more underrepresented community leaders, or more people from third world countries. I'm not only speaking about women here. We need more
Mm,
diversity as a whole. And how to overcome those barriers, or that one in a specific, I would say, um, through mentorship programs, maybe establishing diversity quotas in the sports industry, or helping underrepresented groups advance in their careers. And then a second barrier, in my opinion, that is really close to my heart, we come back to the lack of visibility and role models.
mm,
It is really hard to be what you cannot see, right?
yeah.
And my generation grew up without not seeing any women playing football. I think nowadays young girls around the world are seeing, right,
Yeah.
female footballers out there and being great. But there's one percentage that is on my mind every day. It's only 4%, around 4% of traditional media
Mm,
is talking about women's sport. Only 4%.
mm,
And that percentage hasn't changed in the last 20 years. Now we're seeing it increasing because of social media. So now there's a 15% of the news of sports talking about women.
mm,
which is really great. It's
mm,
improving. Uh, but I do think that we need to share more stories. I do think we need to increase the visibility around women's sports, and not only on the athletes, also on the women, men working in leadership positions around women's sports,
mm,
because girls, young girls, need to realize there's much more than being a player. There's
mm.
so many different things you can do in the sport industry, and we need to be able to create a safe space for them to come in and help us grow the industry as a whole.
I mean, uh, it sounds like there's still a lot of work to do. I guess my only kind of connection to it is that I remember seeing when the Lionesses won the Euros a few years ago. Like the It was so well hyped afterwards. It was all over the media in this country. Um, the and you know young the media, of course, it was really big in the media, and I did kind of think at the time, it's like, is that just because that they won, or is it because so I wonder how the media would have taken it if we'd have not if England hadn't the Lionesses hadn't have won, but the uh, either way, it's a good thing. I'm not saying it's a bad thing, of course. Like the to watch women's football go on the trajectory it is going, albeit maybe not as fast as we would like. It is lovely to see, certainly in this country, and obviously I can't. There's no way I could speak for around the world, and I'm sure there's still a lot of the work to do, and there is still in this country. Um, but yeah, to hear that there's still a lot of work to be done is clear. And to stick with the need for systemic change. I mean, you've been vocal in the past about that need, um, and change often requires both personal and collective effort. What are the key changes you believe need to happen that to level that playing field?
Yeah, I am completely convinced that we need systemic change, not only in women's football, but also in women's sports. And you're right, the Lionesses winning those Euros at home, it was a
Yeah.
turning point. It was a turning point for that team, but it was also a turning point for the industry, because we realize how powerful you can tell those stories, and how much the media can get attention, how much attention you can get from the media, but also how much people you can reach, that maybe, as you mentioned in the beginning, you're not a big football fan,
Yeah.
but it reached you, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Absolutely.
that is great. And you maybe were inspired by all those different stories around, and it is a different side of the football, right? I
Mm,
think women's football appeal to a different audience, and has a different set of values that can reach different targets, different population, that maybe you're not a fan of male football, but then you are a fan of female football, and
mm,
we're seeing that across the world. There's a different market for it. But going back to the systemic change, yes, it does require individual and collective action. So, as a personal story, I in 2019 I got together with one of my best friends, Melissa Ortiz,
mm.
and we have been playing for the Colombian national team for many years, right? And we played everything: World Cups, Olympics, South American Championships, Pan American Games. And we realized, you know what, we need to do something to change this. And
Mm.
we got together, we released a video. It went viral when things didn't go as viral as they go
Yeah.
right now. You Everybody was talking about it, and then we had to travel to Colombia. We did a press conference, and all of a sudden more players were joining, and we realized how much power we had.
Mm,
We talked to the federation, and it was a turning point in Colombian football. Now the team has better conditions, more preparation, more prize money, right? But that is when I realized the power athletes, players have. right?
Mm,
As individuals, but also as collective. And I don't think players realize how much power they have. And I call it a superpower because people actually want to listen to what you have to say. When
mm,
you are a football player, everybody wants to know how you think, right? And what do you want, or how do you see the world? And that's the ultimate power we have. But what
mm,
what what we're lacking in the industry is the collective action, right? The collective, uniting that power as a collective is really hard. One, because of the different realities every single player has, and there's a not the same amount of salaries, money going into the players' pocket. So
mm,
putting yourself out there and asking for change could be difficult because you are putting yourself at risk. But I believe that is the only way to change things, is getting together, getting the player community together, and actually say, okay, this is what we are expecting, and this is how we get there. And
mm,
please, different organizations come in so we can build this sport. And I'm
mm,
not saying building it in a year, but build it with a long-term strategy to
mm,
enhance what we're seeing right now, and to actually create systemic change in which young girls can be a
mm,
part of the system after, but a better, safer, more inclusive, more diverse system. And I think that is one of the ways to do it. That is one of the ways to equal the playing field. But we do also need to enhance media coverage, as we were speaking about
mm.
earlier, and we need to improve infrastructure and youth programs for players. But I do believe the power is in the collective, and I do believe the power is on a lot on the players.
Yeah, it's interesting what you said there about the power that the actual players have um, to have a voice and speak out. And I did watch a clip of the video that you're referring to,
Okay.
and the what you talked about in it was um, uh, about not getting paid and shirts being uniforms being
Yeah.
old and things like that. And so to speak out in that way must have taken a lot of courage. And I wonder if that's where, where you're saying that to make change happen, that players have a big voice. Maybe it's something around fear about, what could be the backlash of speaking out, something that they don't necessarily believe in. So, I mean, in terms of that courage, how did that feel to release that video at the time?
For me, it was the best moment in my career. Not
Sure.
playing in the Olympic Games, not playing in the World Cup, not winning a gold medal at the Pan Am Games.
Mm,
For me, it was that video, that press conference. Why? Because it made me, one, realize the power I had, but it also made me follow my path on my values.
mm,
I realized how much honesty and justice meant for me, and I realized that we are always asking, we need these and these and these, but how are we actually empowering ourselves to make that change? And how are we going to inspire change? And how are we actually going to put it on ourselves to make and create the world that we want to see? Right.
yeah.
So for me, it was the best moment of my life and a turning point. Right
Mm,
after that, I was never the same person. And I started pursuing opportunities and started meeting people and started donating to Common Goal.
mm,
So many different things led me to be a different person who actually wants to help create a better sports industry.
yeah. We often talk about pivotal moments in the work that
Yeah.
we do in impact, and also, what you're describing there is incredibly aligned to our leadership model, where we have a kind of it's a sort of a traffic light system of noticing, deciding, and acting is what it's made up of. But between that deciding and acting phase, talked that there's a large part is to do with courage, which we've talked on. And so the yeah, essentially we describe what you've just talked about there as an act of leadership, which in its sense has meant led to that pivotal moment, which has then, as you've said, been a turning point in your life, and also a turning point in the world of football. So it's yeah, amazing to hear about.
If I can add something there, Dan, I think you also need an ally. Someone asked me that.
Mm,
I think in the Football for Sustainability Summit, they asked me, "Do you think you would have done what you did by yourself?" And no one ever asked me that
yeah,
before, and it made me think on how much Melissa, my friend, meant for me, and and how much I meant for her,
yeah,
saying, "Okay, we can do it, and we are on it together." And I
yeah,
think um, if I wouldn't have an ally, maybe fear would have overcome my sense for justice, right?
yeah,
So I just want to put it out there that
yeah.
you need to find yourself a good ally too.
That's yeah, is a good piece of advice, and especially as being from a world in which you are surrounded by a team, I'm sure that definitely resonates there. And speaking of teams, you've captained every team you've been a part of, and there can't be many players in the world who can say that. What I suppose we've briefly touched on some in terms of systemic the systems that you're a part of. But maybe what are some of the biggest challenges that you have had to lead through yourself, and how did you show up as kind of the best version of yourself to be the leader that your team needed?
Yeah, I think I am a natural leader,
Mm,
in a sense that I'm very vocal. My communication skills are good. Always want to help everybody. I always want to be there for people, but especially my time when I played in Sevilla for 3 seasons, I was the captain there very soon after I arrived, and it made me realize how many different types of leaderships there are right
mm,
inside of a team, especially like in football. There's some silent leaders. I used to think leadership was all about speaking up and not yelling, but yes, you have to yell on the field so they can hear you. But I was always thinking that a leader is that the one that speaks, the one that shows up and says things to people. And back then I realized that there's also silent leaders, some people that would never say anything, but they would be every day there with a smile, wanting to train good. But there are also some leaders that are lead by example, right?
yeah,
They're not the most vocal, but they're the hardest workers on the field. You can expect that from them. And there are leaders like me that I am the vocal leader. I am the one who wants to speak up. I am the one who makes a motivational speech before a game.
yeah,
But one of the biggest challenges in my time as a captain was when I got different injuries throughout my career, but I got injured and I broke my fibula.
right,
Um, and it was a really hard time personally because I have to deal with myself and all the emotions and everything that comes with having being injured, right? All the mental health stuff that goes through your mind. But it was also an opportunity, and my coach made me realize this how to be a different kind of leader, right? I could not be on the field speaking up. I could not be maybe before the games doing that motivational speech. So, how are you going to be a leader for this team? And I think one it made me a better person. So I was always going to the team's training. So I would go there early, I would do my recovery, and then I would go 2 hours to watch the training
yeah,
and and to be there for the young players, to speak with the players who maybe were not having a great day and being, hey, you can do it, chill, relax, breathe. But also I had one-on-one talks with the teammates that were injured that maybe before that for me in my mind were okay,
mm,
but people were having troubles. um, and I also relied a lot on the other captains on the team.
mm,
So we had a talk in which, okay, I'm not there, but I will be here in a different sense. and I will lead this team in a different way in which I was used to. So one, it taught me a lot about leadership. I understood how many different type of leaderships there are, and it also made me realize that you you cannot, or you maybe you don't have to be stuck with that one set of leadership skills you have. You can
Mm.
actually learn, and you can actually become a different uh, leader and a better leader um, when you go through tough times.
Yeah, there's a few things there that I wanted to pick up on, and that presence piece of and not even necessarily physical presence, but making sure that your team know that you are there, whether physically or not, to support them when they need you most. That's very apparent in what we're and there's some parallels that we've come across between the world of football and the world of sport, but also in the world of business as well. Um, it's so often that we use or that sport is used rather as an analogy for the
Yeah,
business world. That
it is very
but
similar.
it's also great to hear that you know the world of leadership is then transferable into the world of sport. And I couldn't help but think whilst you were talking there about the TV show Ted Lasso and how many and how many things out there, and that also made me think. I wonder when there'll be a Ted Lasso but with a female team. I think that would be an impressive one to see.
We
Um,
have a business idea for everyone listening.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, we just need a credit going up the screen at the end.
Yeah.
That'd be great, wouldn't it? I'm sure it could feature you. Maybe not me so much, but I'm sure it could feature you. Um, so as and you've and as someone who's faced challenges all through their career, and also been in a world where, as a young person, growing up in a sort of a, a male dominated space, and or facing challenges along the way, what advice would you give to young people, and I suppose especially women who are navigating their own paths in these traditionally male-dominated spaces?
Well, the advice I would give for young people or young women navigating on this space would be one, not to become someone you're not because you think that's the only way in. I think women bring a lot more to the table and a different set of skills that are very useful in the football world. And sometimes we get into areas that we think we need to be with a more, I don't know, I'm going to call it male energy. Maybe it's not the correct term, but we need to, or we think we need to fit in
Yeah,
by changing ourselves, and I don't think that's a good way to go. I think you should be really honest and stick with who you are as a person and what you bring to the table. So that would be one, and the second one would be demand your seat at the table. Not Yeah, be there, right?
yeah,
If there's a business meal, go, and there's if there's only men, sit down at that table
yeah,
and be there, and talk about what you want and how you want it, and be very confident about it, because I think you are going to be surrounded by a lot of men, and you need to understand how to talk to them and how to be there and how to make a space for yourself. So don't be afraid, and demand your seat at the table would be my second piece of advice.
yeah. That's a great piece of advice. It made me reflect on a previous episode that we had, which again was as I think about now, we've got so many football related episodes in our in our podcast. But one of our early ones was with Liz Ward,
Okay.
who's very uh, is a very well known in English football, and also in both female football, but also black people within football as well. And she was telling us that she would wear she once got mistaken for a waitress in a restaurant when she was, there as a guest, and so she from then on she would uh, made a point of wearing really bright, colorful clothing to never have that mistake again. And it's still crazy that even in this day and age, we find ourselves making these snap judgment calls. And so it kind of made me think about that moment when you're saying, make yourself known, make yourself present otherwise you might get put into the background, which is such a shame. So maybe let's turn this now as we near the end of our episode, even though I could speak to you for hours. Um, um, let's focus on some good news stories. And what good news stories are you seeing out there? What best practice is making a difference?
There's a lot of good stories going on right now in women's football. Things are changing really fast. There's a lot of money going into the game. There are more leagues that are becoming even more and more and more professional, such as the
Mm,
English one. They're paying better, they have better conditions for the players. Social media is giving us a lot more visibility and representation and sharing stories that otherwise would be completely hidden. Um, but I would say one example, going back to the power of the collective and the power of the athletes, would be there was a collective action. Around 150 players sent a letter, sign a letter
right.
that was to the president of FIFA, asking to improve the conditions and the prize money for the 2023 FIFA Women's World Cup in Australia and
Uh,
New Zealand. Uh, right, first time that something like this happened,
yeah.
and to my surprise, FIFA did change stuff, so they equaled the conditions that women footballers had to the male women to the male World Cup. So same hotels, same traveling arrangements, same level of football fields, conditions, etc. But they also gave a package of, I think it was around 150 something million to distribute among the teams. So every player had money. When they went to the World Cup, they got like a percentage
Yeah.
of that prize money. And for me that was amazing because I went into a World Cup and I got paid $0 for that.
Yeah.
Like I got money going to a World Cup. You know what I mean? So for me, that example is something that made me realize how much things are changing really
Yeah.
fast, right? Because it was less than 10 years in which I went to the World Cup, and now we're seeing all of this. But we're also seeing different funds around the world. Like Mercury 13, that is investing in women's teams, that is
Yeah.
investing in women's football, and yeah, I think the future is very bright. So I'm very excited to see what's going to happen, and I think a lot of it's going to happen in the next 5 to 10 years. The industry is really really growing really fast.
And that is amazing to hear. And it is, in a way, it's a shame it's taken this long. But however, that all change that to the positive should never be downplayed. I was just curious there. You were saying about you weren't paid a dollar to perform in the World Cup. I, as I am not an expert in football, what could an international player in the male game be expected to be paid roughly? Any ideas, or is it a
No,
Google job?
it is a very individual basis.
Sure.
So every single team negotiates with their federations
Right.
for prize money, right? But they would never go into a tournament without an agreement. For us, it was really hard because even though we wanted to speak with the federation about having an agreement on prize money, bonuses, whatever it was,
Yeah.
they would never sit down with us. They would say,
Wow.
yes, yes, we'll catch about that later. We'll catch about that later. And during the World Cup, we did speak to the president of the federation, I remember we said, you know what, if you don't sit down with us, we're not going to play the next game.
Yeah, right.
Um, that was never public, but he promised us, it was, I'm gonna try to make it into dollars, around $2,000 if we won that game and went into the next phase of the tournament, which we did. We won and we went on to play against the USA, but that money was never paid to us. Why? Because we never signed an agreement. It was all
Oh, yeah.
vocal. Um, so based on that, a couple of players spoke up and they never came back to the national team. So there's a lot of fear, and there was a lot of fear, and there was a lot of lack of conditions, lack of communication. The power dynamics are really shady in in many countries around the world.
Yeah.
So you I cannot tell you exactly because it is a very individual team to team basis.
Well, again, just hearing you speak then about the case in point that you've been a part of to make significant, and let's face it, it is significant change that you've been a part of in the football world, in the female football world, um, and to so already you can say that you are an inspiration to every young girl that might want to get into football, and to see your work play out in and hearing about it now is just so inspirational. So yeah, I'm just in awe of what the work that you've done, and continue to do. So it's amazing to hear. Let's close off our podcast, which is, we may have already had the answer to this though, which is the same question we ask all of our guests at the end of our episode, which is, if you were to look back on your career, what would be the best piece of advice that you would give yourself if you were to start over?
The best piece of advice, I will have multiple
Sure, go
advices,
for
you
it.
know. I think one would be to enjoy the moments. When I was in the biggest stages of my life, I was so focused on the competition and so focused on the pressure of performing well that I didn't enjoy it as much as I should have. So I would say enjoy the moment and be present and realize what you're doing right now. It matters. Um, Another one would be make more friends, meet more people. Networking is so big, and the world is not as big as we think it is, especially in the sports world. Yeah, meet more people and realize how much power networking has. And yeah, get your seat at the table and be
Yeah.
able to speak up and live by your values.
And it sounds like, and I often push back a little bit and say, do you live by your own advice now? But it
I
sounds
do.
like you definitely do.
I do.
I think
I do.
the
I
last
do
half
now.
an hour has definitely proved that. Um, uh, Listen, Isabella, it's been absolutely incredible talking to you, and I'm so honoured that you've given us an hour out of your day. So thank you ever so much for joining us, and I hope you go on to enjoy the rest of your day. But that just leaves me to say then, if you would like to find out any more about Isabella or her work, then you can find the links for both that and the links to connect with either of us on LinkedIn in the description of where you found today's episode. And if you haven't already, go and view or listen to our back catalogue of episodes. There's loads of stuff that can be learned for you as a leader or as part of your team. So that leaves me to just thank Isabella for joining us again today. And until the next time, take care.